Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock, let's go over the market, let's talk about what is happening on yet another painful day in the market for the most part, especially for Tesla stock. And yeah, I'll give you my thoughts. So as usual, if you enjoy, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, if you do enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts and the charts, etc., especially during these painful days, which I am here for as well, I'm constantly updating. Well, for just $3 a month, I constantly share my thoughts, post updates throughout the trading day itself, mainly on Tesla stocks, sometimes other stocks. So definitely check it out if you're interested. Or for $5 a month, you get access to everything in the first tier, plus NVIDIA daily updates as well. But yeah, jumping into a Tesla. Unfortunately, closing the day down 8.5%, which is a pretty sizable drop. I'm not going to lie, closing at $302.50 per share as we approach what should be a pretty significant target. Now, even a long time ago, I mentioned, I still remember this was probably weeks ago. I mean, obviously back then was, nobody knew for sure, obviously, but I did mention how if we ever poke our heads into the twos, so like there's a two in front of Tesla's stock price now, people are going to start freaking out. And I don't think we're fully out of the woodwork yet. I actually do think we're getting a short-term bounce here, or at least like pretty much around here. But my overall target to the downside still remains to be, honestly, 280 roughly, right? 280, 290, something like that, because that is, of course, on the weekly time frame going to be two pretty major confluences, I guess, where you can see we again have this major area that was, of course, a substantial amount of resistance in the past, right? Constant resistance in the past. And now we're finally, after this massive move up, back where up here, everyone was telling me we're going even higher. Well, we're actually finally getting that move back down. Finally, we're not there just yet. I do think that there is still, maybe not right away. I mean, this can still take some time, maybe another week or two for sure, easily. But overall, the picture, don't be, I guess what I'm trying to say is nobody knows the bottom, but be mentally prepared to see about 280-ish. Maybe 290, maybe 280, maybe even 270, but 280, give or take $10, I would say. So 270 to about 290. Like, just be mentally ready for that, because that is a real possibility moving forward, right? Over the next maybe 2 weeks or something like that. That is an actual possibility. But I do think it will be a pretty damn good opportunity as well, because again, unless obviously something really crazy happens, all we're going to be doing is essentially just turning an old resistance into a new support. And this was a pretty massive area of resistance back in the past. And this is a weekly chart, right? We found many instances where, we did get pretty substantial, not only just resistance, but each time we got resisted here, we saw, pretty decent drawdowns, right? It was a pretty massive area of significance in that sense, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. So obviously, naturally, I would expect this to be some pretty powerful support for Tesla. Again, this can go all the way as low as 270, but it can, technically speaking, 300 even could be that, but I'm not super convinced just yet. But just again, the only reason I'm saying this is just to be mentally prepared. Now, that's more of the longer term. That's more thinking out, several weeks in advance, right? Maybe even into like middle of March potentially, or at the very least early March, which is, again, another week or two from here. Short-term-ish, however, let's go to the very short-term. The very short-term is looking like this, right? The very short-term, we're kind of setting up this looking, descending channel, maybe descending slightly of a descending wedge, but essentially we're in this kind of rough scenario right now where worst case scenario, we see one more drop down to about 295. However, if we start getting it back above 305 to 306-ish, that should break us out of this kind of downward channel / wedge and this massive decline, of course, and we should get a relief rally back to, at least in my opinion, about 313, 314. Best case scenario, about that 325 level that we did, of course, lose this morning. And, obviously that came down with a pretty substantial drop down even further. So those are the levels to watch out for. The thing that's good to see on the daily chart, however, is the fact that as we're making these lower lows, right, as we're making these lower lows, you can see the RSI, at least my RSI on the 5 period setting, is actually making higher lows, right? We are setting up a little bit of a bullish divergence on the RSI, despite making lower lows, of course, on the actual stock. That's a good sign. Now, obviously it's not enough to be the only sign, but it's a promising sign. It is a good sign. That is something that's nice to see, I guess you can say. And we are dropping a pretty significant volume. Now, people can argue one way, saying that this is pretty bearish because, well, usually rallying on high volume is really bullish and dropping on low volume should be bearish. But the opposite argument is the fact that the reason the volume is so high is because there's a chance that people are just simply panic selling, and or there's a lot of stop losses being hit and a lot of shares being called away because of it, essentially, right? So whichever way you want to spin it, I'm not 100% sure sure, I'll be completely honest, is, you can make an argument for both. However, the reason I believe that we could be getting, at the very least, a short-term relief rally, potentially even starting as early as tomorrow. On top of that, of course, little 15-minute descending kind of channel slash wedge, of course, assuming we break above kind of 305, 306-ish, is, of course, if I go to Tesla's options flow, which is not updating for some reason. Let me go ahead and refresh that. Go here, go to Tesla. If I go to Tesla's options flow, you can see towards the end of the day, a lot of short-term calls came in, right? You can see a lot of them, at least a decent amount of them are for 0228. Of course, that is naturally going to be, well, this Friday, right? Just a few days away, about 3 days away. So, a lot of calls are coming in for Tesla stock short-term, right? Keep in mind, these are short-term calls coming in. They're pretty decent ones too, like, almost 200K here, almost 300K here, 200, whatever. They keep coming in, like 325 strike, 300 strike, 325 strike, 325 strike, 320 strikes, right? Like, that's good. I like to see this. I like to see, when the stock is closing towards the end of the day and within the last like 20-ish minutes of the day, seeing these kind of like very short-term call options come in on, in this case, Tesla, that usually is a good sign. So, let's see if this actually gets some follow through. But I do think that we should be due for, at the very least, a relief rally. Not necessarily, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. It doesn't mean that we're, hey, that's it. We're all good. That's it. Hey, that wasn't too bad. It doesn't mean that at all, right? But it just means that this is a bit of a relief rally. Watch for the main two resistance levels, being the main one, of course, being one of which rather being about 314, but the main one, in my opinion, being about 325. I do think 325 right now, short term, is the best case scenario. If we break back above 325 and evidently start turning it back into support, that would be a good sign, in which case then we'd start looking for an actual move back up to retest this actual trend line all the way back up here. But that's still a big if, right? The first step is, of course, let's see if we can even recapture $325 per share, which of course in the past acted as a pretty nice support. Losing it is not ideal, so the bulls do have their work essentially cut out for them to regain control at the very least above $325 per share, and then we'll talk more about upside from there. But that's gonna be the main thing. Now, if we potentially get this little relief rally, but we end up getting resisted by about that 325-ish range, that most likely means that we're not done just yet, and we most likely make our way one more leg further back down to, again, about, give or take, of course, $280-ish per share, which then also would coincide with a lot of things, such as potentially touching actually the bottom of this downward channel. If I zoom out, this kind of red trend line right here, you can see, which has had us bounce on it, especially on the weekly. It looks a little bit cleaner on the weekly, which we did bounce from several times. Let me go ahead and readjust this trend line a little bit here, right? Something like this, give or take, of course, right? But, this little trend line right here, right? We bounced off of it several times before, and that also kind of lines up if it were to happen, let's say, I don't know, within the first or second week of March, that also lines up with about $280-ish per share. So a lot of things line up with this 280 level per share. Again, I think we're pretty oversold here short term. I think we're, it's getting a little bit on the more extreme end, right? If I bring out my other bands, we're well below the Bollinger bands again, which, last time that happened, we did bleed for a few days before getting a pretty decent quick rally back up. But I expect something maybe like this, right? Something like this right here, get a bit of a rally back up. And from there, we'll have to reassess how we react to about 325. Maybe we won't even get there. Maybe we just get to 314. Like, we don't know for sure, but those are the main two levels. But I would expect at least a 325-ish retest, personally speaking. If I bring out my other bands, for instance, if I bring out, remove these for now, you can see on these bands here, we're actually very close to the red line once again, which, again, to me, especially with the combined RSI being, oversold and a bit bullish divergence, does show me some pretty extreme levels of being, oversold to a certain extent, essentially, right? Where, yeah, we could technically go lower, but at this point, when you're somewhere like all the way down here towards these bands, the downside should, in theory, of course, be more limited than the potential. I don't want to say the potential upside from here. In theory, yes, but what it really just means is the fact that the downside should start being a little bit more on the limited end, because we're just getting to some pretty extreme levels of being quote unquote oversold. Now things can stay oversold for a long time, but just statistically, I guess you can say, right? Statistically, right? Again, because for instance, even just bringing out the Bollinger Bands, the thing is, if you don't know how Bollinger Bands work, right? Just a very quick explanation. Now, they're not perfect. Nothing is perfect. There's no indicator that you just turn your brain off and it does everything for you. But the way the Bollinger Bands work, for instance, is when they're set at a, the default setting, which is a 2 standard deviation from the middle, essentially this little middle white line, right? They're usually set from about a two standard deviation from above and below. Usually what it means is about 90 to 95% of the time, the stocks the stock will maintain within the upper and lower Bollinger Band. Now, Tesla is a bit of an exception at times, but for instance, even if you go back here, you can see usually it's maintained pretty nicely within it, right? Now, the one thing you have to watch out for, and the reason we're selling off this aggressively, which is something I missed, I'll be honest, I should have noticed this, but I missed it. Same thing happened with Amazon, actually. If I go to Amazon, same thing happened right here. But if you notice, the Bollinger Band's contracted, right? That's one thing I do like about Bollinger Bands. They show contraction and expansion, essentially, right? In this case, you know, when the Bollinger Bands contract this aggressively, which is something I unfortunately missed, that implies that there is like a squeeze essentially happening. Remember how I used to use, if people that, you know, are long viewers of my channel, I used to use the kind of example of like a kettle or like a pot with steaming water underneath, but you're like closing the lid and you're not letting that kind of pressure escape. Right? That's kind of the same idea when the Bollinger Bands get tight like that. It's a lot of pressure, essentially, momentum building up, and it's ready to explode in a certain direction. And more often than not, whenever it gets this tight, you know, if it starts hugging the bottom line and it starts surpassing the bottom line, that usually means that the momentum will be to the downside and vice versa, right? So keep that in mind, right? Same thing happened with Amazon, just as an example. Up here, you can see it kind of started getting tight here. It got tight here, right? Pretty tight. And then it kind of broke above, and then momentum's to the upside. Here, we broke below, momentum's to the downside, which again is something I unfortunately missed. That is my fault, but it is what it is sometimes. You know what I mean? But yeah, anyways, that's just an example of why this move can feel so aggressive, because there was a lot of momentum building up. There was a lot of momentum building up, and that's why we're moving down very, very quickly with the market itself because of just that compression that existed, right, for Tesla stock. So sometimes it is what it is, especially when it comes to a volatile stock like Tesla. However, again, the overall perspective is still longer term speaking. Again, I don't want to try to tell you where the bottom is for sure. I don't know where the bottom is going to be, but I do strongly believe about 300 to as low as 270, right? That kind of $30-ish range is, in theory, should be some pretty powerful contention for, at the very least, a midterm bottom, right? For sure, a short-term bottom. Okay, I don't want to say for sure, but a very high chance to a short-term bottom and even a mid-term bottom. Potentially, best case scenario, a long-term bottom as well. Now, obviously, if we start losing these levels, and let's say we lose this trend line right here, so essentially, if we pretty much really start closing the week, you know, well below like 270, I would say, okay, then we start getting, you know, some serious concerns going up for Tesla stock. Okay, things are not looking as good anymore, or convincing, right? However, we're obviously nowhere near there, and you know, as of right now, I would expect this area that was a massive resistance to be support. So let's watch for those levels, right? To the downside, you have those levels. Overall, again, that one might take some time because I think short term we're still oversold. Especially when you look at the 15-minute chart, we do have, again, that, you know, descending channel slash wedge, if you will, which I do expect a breakout at some point. Maybe we get one more move to the downside to 295, but ultimately this should break out to the upside. A break of about 305, 306 should be slightly more, you know, better confirmation of that breakout. So let's watch for that as well. But that's kind of my perspective. Again, combine all those factors with these end of day calls coming in on Tesla stock for literally this Friday. I like to see those signs. So as of right now, I do expect a short-term relief rally, really just in the market, and obviously Tesla should participate. And let's see how that reacts. But again, if we do get this rally, short-term rally, 314-ish to most likely 325 as the main level. Watch for those. Let's see how we react. And I think we kind of just go from there one step at a time, ultimately, right? So we looked at the options flow, not much else to say there. But yeah, thanks for watching. And as usual, I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.